All right. So it is 5 o'clock and it's just you and me, Miss Chadwick. So can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Okay. Well, before I start going over these materials, what I have is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have covered since the midterm philosophy of religion and ethics. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's all we've covered, right? Okay. All right. Usually I've covered more than that. I don't know why I didn't cover more this time, but I know it worked out to y'all's advantage, so that's good. All right. The second thing I would ask you is this. Um, what would you suggest, and I would ask this of anyone who's here, but what would you suggest that I do differently next semester that would be helpful to the students?
Yeah, so I, funny enough, emailed you my answers to the professor survey.
Oh,
survey.
were those yours?
Yeah, and all of it was just great things. The only thing that I think would help coming from someone who works like 40, 60-hour weeks and trying to juggle school on top of it is just
Yeah.
having maybe like pop quizzes or practice exams so that I can kind of gauge where I'm at before the midterm, because I didn't do so great on the midterm.
Okay.
And since unfortunately it's a big portion of my grade, like I'm really doing my best to make sure that I'm diligent and focused for the final.
Yes. Well, that was, I took your comment along those lines to heart. And when I was, in fact, last week, I was working on my spring 22 classes. And
It looks like you froze. I may have lost you. I don't know if it's my connection or yours. I'm going to try to leave and then come back, see if that works.
are you there now?
There we go. Sorry about that.
No, I'll tell you, it may happen again. I don't know what's going on with our power out here where I live in Weston Lakes near Fulshire, but it's been blinking all day long. And so if it happens again, just log back in again. So
Yeah,
but
no worries.
so I scheduled more exams and more opportunities, and I tried to take that to heart. So that was good. You guys didn't have any quizzes this semester. Did y'all have any forums?
We did have the forums, and that's what really got me, is I feel like I understood the forums and I could reply really well, and I compared my answers to other people's. And so
Okay.
that was my main gauge of kind of where I was as far as comprehension. And then I got to the exam, and if I'm being honest, true, false are not
Yeah.
my forte, because all it takes is one word to kind of sway it one direction or another.
Okay, so, and you say quizzes would help as well.
Just something that way, it's a similar format or style to the exam, so there's a little bit more exposure earlier on, and you can kind of gauge, and it
I like that.
doesn't necessarily have. Oh, go ahead.
I think that's good. I think that's good. I could structure those quizzes in a fashion that they would lead it naturally into the exam.
And I hate being a proponent of that, because I do feel that college and education nowadays is very like, study for an exam.
Sure.
And it's not really about comprehension. And that's what I really loved about your course, is that there was that rigor and that urge for
Okay.
comprehension. However, even if it's just like an optional thing, you know, someone as of
Sure.
myself, I would take the initiative to take those to gauge myself and
Okay.
prepare myself.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think that's helpful. And because I want it to be a, you know, I hadn't thought, I think about quizzes as being such a burden, but I hadn't even thought about it's a good exposure to the type of question you're going to have on the major exam. And that seems to be what you're saying.
And yeah, and a lot of it too, you know, moving from an in-person classroom to online, you
Yes.
unfortunately you lose a lot of that personable conversation, and you know, you can really gauge, are they
Right.
understanding or are they just nodding their heads?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Other thoughts at all?
No, not really. There was one thing I noticed that was a little tricky, but it's not hard to navigate, is how I think you have multiple courses, like you have a course in ethics and a course in philosophy.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the overlapping material was a little confusing, but I mean, you explained it rather well. So it was fine for me. That's honestly the only other thing I could think of. And it's kind of just being nitpicky.
No. So, okay. Explain that to me once again.
So, and it in more recent videos and weeks, it hasn't been a concern, but I think towards the very beginning of the course, some of your material overlapped when we talked
Yeah.
about epistemology and things
Yeah.
like that. It overlapped with your ethics course.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I
And
see.
then since it was like double material, we're only looking at part of it. That was the only slight confusing part. But again, that's just being nitpicky, because in your lecture videos you specified.
Are you in my ethics class as well?
No, I'm not. I'm studying for psychology, so I'm just taking your philosophy.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. That helps. That's good. That's good. That's good. All right. Let me see. Silvio Owano Sami. Can you hear me? Evidently not.
Yes,
Oh,
Professor.
oh, yeah, there you are, Silvio. All right. So, Silvio,
Yes, Professor.
do you have suggestions on how I might be more effective in my course next semester?
Oh, as my classmates say, I think the PowerPoint, they are like a little bit soft on the information, but you try to explain it very well on the videos. Try
Okay.
to like each sentence, that's really good.
Okay.
Trying
Good.
to read the PowerPoint by itself is not helpful at all. I tried to do it with a couple of forums without watching video, and it was really hard. So
Okay. All right.
So
Okay.
it's really cool that you provide those videos explaining each PowerPoint. It's
I see. Okay. So, okay, good. That's good. That's helpful. All right. All right. Any other suggestions, Sylvia? And you guys will not hurt my feelings. I'm pretty cold and indifferent. I want to be sensitive, but you will not hurt my feelings. I want to do better. Okay.
no,
All right.
that's good in
Okay.
the class. To
All
be
right.
an online class, it was really interesting. Each
Okay. Good.
forum has interesting question, but the thing is, I was like a little bit focused on some questions that I was slow on the other ones.
Okay. Okay.
Too much information, and I think that's good for me, but it's a little bit hard for me because it couldn't help me to complete all the forums.
Yes. Okay.
So
Okay.
I
All right.
think you have good questions on your forums, questions that are interesting for sure,
Okay.
and that everybody has question about it. Right now, I'm in the forum of religion, and I stayed
Yeah.
there for a week. I keep looking for questions and answers, and it's really interesting each forum. So.
Okay.
mm,
Good. 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 All right. All right. Well, that's helpful, and I appreciate it. It's been good to have you in the class. I'm going to just go through these things, and if you have questions regarding something that I leave out, then you guys do not hesitate to jump in and say, "Hey, Dr. Carter's, Can you wait for a moment? Let me ask you this. Can I get clarity on this or that? So, and then I also will post the video that we're doing now to the course website tonight and get that done. And so if you need to re-reference it, then you can go back to it. All right, so I have that we've covered two areas, philosophy of religion and ethics. And so I'm going to talk about ethics first, and then I will talk about philosophy of religion. And I'll just start talking and you guys can jump in as you want to. All right, so we talked about ethics, and I think we talked about the nature of ethics at the beginning of our material on ethics. And we talked about, let me see if I can pull up that slide. 1 second. One second. Did we talk about the three main branches of ethics? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Okay, did we talk about, let me see, normative ethics, applied ethics, and meta ethics? We didn't talk about that. All right.
No.
Okay, good. Okay.
So we did touch on meta ethics, I believe.
So we got
Meta-
physics,
okay.
and epistemology.
Okay, all right, very good. We didn't talk about epistemology in this last half, did we?
No, not yet. If
Yeah.
I'm being honest, I'm about halfway through the ethics videos. I'm about 7 videos in,
Yeah,
just because I worked Monday to Friday, so today's all like my classwork day.
that's fine. That's fine.
But so far, I know for a fact we did touch on meta ethics briefly.
Okay, so really under ethics, I try to cover the following, and I'm going to cover this, and you tell me if there's something I'm leaving out that you need clarity on. Under what is ethics, there are basically 3 areas of ethics. There are normative ethics, and there are meta ethics, and there is applied ethics. Meta ethics is essentially theoretical ethics. It deals with theory. And so what we did was we looked at different theories of ethics. We looked at Plato, we looked at Kant and his categorical imperative, I believe. We looked at natural law ethics. We looked at utilitarianism. So those are theories of ethics. Now, so meta ethics deals with theories of ethics. Normative ethics deals with ethics as, in case this is on the exam, and I don't think it is if we didn't cover it, it shouldn't be. But normative ethics deals with establishing a norm or prescriptive ethics, telling us what we should do. We should not lie. We should always tell the truth. We should not steal. That's normative ethics. That's prescriptive ethics. It's prescribing a course of behavior. The third area is applied ethics. Applied ethics deals with the idea of what I call issuism, where we talk about capital punishment. We talk about the ethics of physician-assisted suicide, the ethics of abortion, the ethics of affirmative action, and those kinds of things. So those are applied ethics. But meta ethics primarily deals with theoretical ethics. Meta means above or kind of beyond, which is a way to refer to the idea of ethics as theory. So we talked about meta ethics as theory. So that's theoretical ethics. So is there anything else that comes to mind with regard to what I have said regarding what is, well, another thing I would say is this regarding what is ethics. I typically try to point out that what is the difference between the term morality and the term ethics? And I don't know if I raised that in y'all's class or not, but in the difference between the two, if I did, is that frequently people use the term morality as related to individual ethics or personal morality, individual morality. But ethics is a more general term in common day usage. It refers to the ethics of a culture, the ethics of a people group, the ethics of a society. So morality tends to be used in a more personal sense, and the term ethics tends to be used in a more general sense. But then there are also those who argue that those two words, ethics and morality, are essentially synonyms, that they mean the same thing. But I think there's somewhat of a nuanced difference in the way that we use those things. And we kind of, I admit that we do use them interchangeably, but I think in people's minds, there's somewhat of a nuanced difference. Now, either Silvio or Ms. Chadwick, right? Do you have thoughts about? Do you have thoughts that on things that you're curious about the issue of meta ethics, or something that I didn't cover in my comments then?
No.
Okay. All right. So go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I did have one question. So when you got into, sorry, I'm trying to find which philosopher. I believe it was, More. When you got into More, it got a little confusing because I think there was a typo in one of your slides.
Okay, G.E. Moore
Yes.
and the naturalistic fallacy.
Yeah, so he was talking about, you were talking about that, and in it, you basically said that he partially agrees, but then he doesn't agree, and it kind of like confused me just a bit.
Do you remember the slide? If I pull those slides up,
If I saw it, I could remember it, yes.
can you see that slide? Is that it?
So go to the next one.
Any of those familiar?
They're all familiar. I'm trying to figure out which one. It was
Okay.
one where it said can, and I think you said it was supposed to be cannot. It was worded weird.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Not that that helps any.
All right. The property of goodness cannot be defined.
No, it wasn't that.
Okay, it can only be shown and grasped. Good cannot be empirically or scientifically tested. You don't see it? Okay.
No, but if you could just touch on that just a little bit, because it sounded like he was saying, like, by defining good and bad, you can kind of use analysis to decide what you do ethically.
Okay. Let me back up here.
Oh wait, that's the slide.
That's it?
Yeah, where it says ethical naturalism.
Ethical naturalism, ethics and morality / good and bad can be empirically defined. Ethical naturalism does say, and maybe when I lectured on this, I misstated, but let me kind of go over this slide. Hume is an empiricist, and David Hume says that, well, let me say what an empiricist is. As an empiricist, David Hume says we can trust our senses, and the only way that we can know something is true is if we can verify it by sensory perception, by what we see, touch, taste, feel, by the scientific method, etc. The problem is that works with regard to assessing scientific truths, but with regard to ethical truths are in a totally separate category. For example, you can empirically verify that 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen will produce water. You can do that in a lab. You can empirically and scientifically verify that kind of statement. If I say to you, if you mix 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen, the result will be water. Well, you can verify that scientifically. But if I say to you, lying is wrong, how do you verify that empirically or scientifically? You can't do that. You simply cannot do that. Ethical statements and affirmations of ethical truth are in a totally different category, all right? Hume says empiricism, he's an empiricist, statements must be verifiable to have meaning. For example, Donald Trump is president of the United States. That statement is verifiable. We can hear that. We could, when I did that slide, he was president. You can hear that, see that, you can read that, that's verifiable. But ethics is in a different category. However, ethical naturalism is as a movement does argue that ethics and morality and good and bad can be empirically verified. Now, I don't know how that's possible. I just don't know how you can do that. But ethical naturalists say that just as you can verify 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen equals water, the ethical naturalist would say that ethical statements can be verified in some fashion, just like you would verify that Donald Trump is president of the United States. Perhaps ethical naturalism would say something like this. Ethical naturalism might say ethical statements are verifiable empirically in that if you obey them, they lead to a more well-balanced, well-rounded, less chaotic, purposeful, and meaningful life. That, I believe, is the way that ethical naturalism would approach the question of whether or not ethical statements can be verified by the senses. So does that make sense, Ms. Chadwick?
That does. So just to clarify, with ethical naturalism, it's basically saying if something is natural, like conception leads to birth, then it therefore must be good. But if you were to...
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Yeah, that's a good application.
Okay. And so I think what confused me is that it was explained that way towards, okay, if something's natural or not natural, that's how it's good or bad. But then we turn around and say, okay, but that's not realistic. You can't actually define ethics empirically. And then we go into G.E. Moore's kind of natural fallacy. And that's what confused me, that turnaround.
Right. And G.E. Moore, do you understand G.E. Moore's naturalistic fallacy?
Yeah. So he's basically saying that you can't actually define ethics through empirical methods, and that in actuality, it's more of just like an emotional response.
Yes.
It's not actual facts.
That's what G.E. Moore and David Hume are essentially saying, that, like I said at first, you cannot empirically verify an ethical statement such as homosexuality is wrong. How do you empirically verify that? That is in a different category than 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen produces water. And so when we apply the principle of verifiability from science to ethical statements, we're making what Moore and others call a categorical mistake. We're imposing scientific methodology onto ethical statements. And Moore says ethical statements are in a different category. Moore and Hume, they are emotive statements, emotional statements. There's no way to verify them. But ethical naturalism, as you point out, does say that in some shape, form, or fashion, they affirm what is natural in the life cycle or in the living of life. Then it is verifiable in that it leads to a purposeful, meaningful, significant, well-rounded, less chaotic life.
So
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
am I correct in thinking that you introduced ethical naturalism not because you necessarily 100% support it, but more so to introduce G.E. Moore and David Hume's outlooks on it?
Yeah, I don't agree with ethical naturalism at all, to be quite honest. I just don't agree with that. I think ethical statements are unverifiable. I mean, I mean, they're pragmatic. I think they can have a pragmatic effect on our lives. They can help us. Ethical statements: "Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness." Those can have a pragmatically positive impact on our lives. The practicality of them, I think, is there. But as far as empirically verifying them, like we would empirically verify a scientific statement, no, you can't. I don't think you can do that. But I just kind of threw that in as a counter opposing view, or as an opposing view. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It makes sense in its own little world, but it doesn't help us in philosophy.
Right. But yeah, Hume says that they're not verifiable, but ethical naturalism, and G.E. Moore says the same thing, they're not verifiable, but naturalism would say they are verifiable. And I just don't see how that's the case. All right. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
All right. All right. If someone observes a person saving an orphan from a burning building, how do they know that this action is good? Do you think this can be verified empirically? Now, that's an interesting statement. Can that be verified empirically? I don't think so. I think you can say it's a practical and a benevolent and an altruistic thing to put yourself, but can it be verified empirically? I don't think so. I just don't think so. In the sense that scientific truth is submitted to empirical verification. Ethical truth is totally different, right? The preacher gets up on Sunday morning and says, we're going to preach today from the 10 Commandments that says, Exodus 20, that says, thou shalt not kill. All right. And he says that's an absolute moral truth that applies to all people of all times, of all eras, and all ages. Is that empirically verifiable? I don't know. It's not empirically verifiable like H2O. You can't do that. Ethical statements are in their own category. All right, but is it pragmatically beneficial to the living of life? I think you can make that argument, but that's not the same as verifiability.
Professor?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I have a question. It's like a mix between ethical and religion. Can I make a question?
Yes.
Okay. So I already asked my friend when they talk about religion. If you are in this situation that the life of somebody is in danger, and the only option is to kill the person that is trying to kill the other one, what you gonna do? You're gonna put yourself in danger, or escape, let the people die, or what you gonna do?
Now, kind of summarize the question for me. What exactly are you asking?
So the thing is it gonna be ethical to let the people? Is it gonna be good for an ethical to let the people die because you wanna save your life, or it's gonna be ethical to save the people and maybe you're gonna die for him?
Oh, well, I think the ethical thing to do is sacrifice. I mean, that's why in an effort to save them, that's the ethical thing to do. I think that's the ethical thing to do. We admire that in our. There's something about in our characters. We admire a person who will sacrifice or take a risk in order to save someone, because that can have a practical benefit, and that's a noble deed and a respectable deed. But that's different than saying, can we verify scientifically that it is true? No, we can't verify an ethical deed scientifically, but we can look at it pragmatically and say, yes, indeed, that's what a decent human being does, is tries to rescue someone else from danger, tries to preserve their life, etc. Does that make sense?
Yes, but the thing is, I know that most of the philosopher doesn't believe in the Bible. I mean, doesn't think that the Bible has reasonable arguments. So my thing is, the Bible say we don't have to kill somebody. So if we kill that person, are we doing something bad?
If we kill them, are we doing something bad?
Yeah, we kill that person to save another one. So
Oh,
we
no,
can able to save another life.
well, I know. I think whenever you read a religious truth that says "Thou shalt not kill," um, that requires some degree of interpretation. I mean, because even in the judicial system, we acknowledge that in certain instances, the taking of a human life is justified if it's out of defense of self. Someone's threatening your life, then that's justified. Or if it's in defense of others, then it's justified. Even in our judicial system, we allow that. But religiously, that religious commandment that you're talking about is essentially saying or condemning the random, arbitrary, unprovoked taking of an innocent human life. Most cultures would agree that the random, unprovoked, arbitrary taking of a human life is wrong, morally wrong. Now, if you're defending your child from someone who's threatening your child's life, or defending your neighbor from someone who's threatening your neighbor's life, then that constitutes an exception. But that religious commandment is addressing the random, arbitrary, calloused, cold taking of a human life without cause. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I feel like you can also look at it in like a utilitarian sense where it's like, okay, yes, it's wrong for me to kill this one person. However, in doing so, I'm saving 5 people's lives. And so it balances out and the good outweighs the bad.
You're exactly right. That's a classic utilitarian hypothetical. If I can save 5 lives by the taking of 1 life, then therefore it's justified. Now, I gave y'all, did I give y'all the hypothetical under utilitarianism that talked about someone has kidnapped you or you and your family, and that person says, I'm going to kill all 5 of you unless you kill 3 members of your family. And the utilitarian there would say, well, it's better for you to kill only 3 than to refuse to kill the 3 and allow the other person to kill all 5. Did I give that illustration to you guys?
No, I think I would have remembered that one.
Yeah. Now that's the problem with utilitarian. When you reduce it just to sheer numbers, that's the problem with quantitative utilitarianism. When you reduce it just to numbers. So, but utilitarianism does have, in war, for example, a sergeant or a platoon leader may sacrifice 10 lives in order to kill 80 of the enemy lives. Does that make sense?
So,
So those are classic utilitarian justifications. Yes, sir.
In that case, we can say that the end justify the meaning, or the end justify the means.
Let's say that, the ends justify the means. Yes, that's utilitarianism at its extreme. The end justifies the means. So if you're a quantitative utilitarian, and I hope we talked about that, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yes, yeah. If you're a quantitative utilitarian, you're going to say, well, okay, let's do the math. If I kill 3 of my family, only 3 are going to die. If I refuse to kill 3 of my family, then our kidnapper is going to kill all 5 of us. So therefore, I'm going to kill 3 of my family, right? So that's quantitative utilitarianism on steroids. So it's risky, that's dangerous. But there is a place for utilitarianism. Policy decisions with regard to health care, policy decisions with regard to vaccine mandates, policy decisions with regard to war issues. We sacrifice a certain group of people, young men, in order to defeat the enemy. So utilitarianism really plays itself out in policy all the time, but it's nonetheless a problematic theory. It's a challenging theory, and I think it can become a very dangerous theory. But it's very helpful as far as policy is concerned. Does that make sense?
That's when you agree to kill the 3 family members, but then turn around and kill the bad guy.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, you can see the problems with utilitarianism. All right. So any other questions about that? I mean, I've got some more stuff to talk about. I want to address. We talked about. Did we talk about logic in ethics with you guys?
I'm still only halfway through the video, so I don't know. Not in the first half.
I would have done that at first, so I don't think I did then. Did we talk about Kant and the categorical imperative?
Yes, and we did touch on some more rational explanations of ethics.
Did we talk about Plato?
No, we didn't talk about Plato, but we did talk about Kant.
Okay, all right. So we talked about Kant and the categorical imperative. Kant and the categorical imperative. Categorical imperative number 1. Well, let me say this. Kant and the categorical imperative is a deontological theory. What do I mean by deontological theory? I mean, it's a theory that's based upon duty to a moral code. Deontological ethics are concerned with duty to a moral code. Deontological ethics are also not concerned with consequences. They say, just keep the code, just keep the moral standard. Whether the code is the law of the land, or whether the code is a religious code, or whether the code is a professional code of ethics for a nurse, or for a doctor, or for a lawyer, or for an engineer, for a social worker. So deontological ethics is concerned with the keeping of a code, regardless of what the consequences of keeping the code might be. The illustration that is typically used to drive home the point of deontological ethics and the categorical imperative is the illustration of Anne Frank and the Nazi soldiers. I think I used that in class, did I not?
Yes, you used that example a few times.
All right, so Anne Frank is hiding out in your basement. This will just give you an idea of how the deontological ethics works. Anne Frank is hiding out in your basement or your attic, and the Nazi soldiers come to your house and say, "We hear that Anne is hiding out in your attic." Well, in that moment, you're confronted with a moral dilemma. Am I going to lie or am I going to tell the truth? All right, so you've been to church, let's say, last Sunday, or to synagogue last Sunday, and the rabbi or the ministers preached on the Old Testament commandment that says, "Thou shalt not lie." That's what the code says. All right, so you say, all right, I have to keep the code, so I'm going to tell the truth. That's what deontological ethics does. That's what non-consequentialist ethics does. It keeps the code. Well, I say, hold on, if you tell the truth, Anne may die. Non-consequentialist ethics or deontological ethics says it doesn't make any difference what the consequences are. You're obligated to tell the truth, do what the code says. So you do that regardless of the consequences. So that's an example of what it means to be duty bound to a moral code. Now, let me talk specifically about the categorical imperative as a reflection of deontological ethics. Mr. Kant presented two versions, really three, but two that I'm concerned with, of the categorical imperative. The first version of the categorical imperative talked about or said, when you're confronted with a moral dilemma, act in such a way that you would want everyone else to act if they were in the same moral dilemma. So it says, act in such a way that you would want everyone else to act if they were in the same moral dilemma. That is called the principle of universalizability. The principle of universalizability. You just act in a way that you would want everyone to act in the moral dilemma. Let's apply that to the Anne Frank illustration. Kant says you should ask yourself, what would I want everyone to do in this situation? Well, someone might be inclined to say, well, I'd want everyone to lie so that Anne would live. Well, Mr. Kant would say, first of all, that's consequentialism, and you don't make moral decisions based upon consequences. Secondly, Mr. Kant would say, you can't live in a society where everyone lies. You can't have contracts. You can't have friendships, you can't have marriages. So therefore, lying is not the universal thing that you would want people to do. Telling the truth is the universal thing that you would want people to do. So therefore, you would tell the truth. So categorical imperative version 1 is concerned with the principle of universalizability. Categorical imperative version number 2 is concerned with, or says this, when you're confronted by a moral dilemma, you should always treat people as an end rather than as a means. Always treat others as an end rather than as a means. That has what I call the principle of dignity. We treat people with dignity. We don't use them for our purposes. So that's hard to reconcile for me with the Anne Frank illustration, but nonetheless, that's what Kant says. So that's the categorical imperative. Weaknesses of the categorical imperative: it is hard to apply. It's very hard to apply. Mr. Kant tells us what to do, but he doesn't help us flesh out how to do it. It's hard to apply. Another weakness of the categorical imperative is that it sometimes leads to absurd consequences. For example, I tell the truth and I keep the code, but Anne Frank may die. Well, that's absurd. That's absurd. I mean, I've strained it on that and I've swallowed a camel, really, Anne Frank dies, but I can rest assured that I've told the truth and done the right thing. That's not good. So those are two weaknesses of Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. Any other questions? Any questions about Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative?
No, my only question is, in your lecture video, you said that we were only going to be quizzed on or examined on the categorical imperative number 1.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Yes. I like categorical imperative number 1. My dog's driving me crazy. I like categorical imperative number 1. I struggle with categorical imperative number 2 only because I'm not sure how. It's not nearly as good as categorical imperative number 1. So yeah, number 1 is what you want to focus on. All right. Any other questions about the categorical imperative? So just remember that it's deontological and emphasizes duty to a moral code. It is non-consequentialist. He's not concerned with consequences or outcomes. And then remember the substance of categorical imperative version 1 and the principle of universalizability. Another theory that we looked at under this, I think, was natural law ethics. True?
Yes.
All right, natural law ethics. I should have, and I'm sorry for my lack of recollection. I didn't get the chance to go back and look at my PowerPoints. but I probably laid out for you a grid of some sort with regard to the life cycle, right?
Yes, you did.
Yes. So I said, okay, natural law ethics are essentially Roman Catholic ethics. Natural law ethics have their roots in Aquinas, the Roman Catholic theologian. Aquinas adapted Aristotle's ethics. And essentially, Aquinas just baptized Aristotle's ethical methodology into the Catholic Church. And so what I usually do is, and I think I did this, I said, okay, let's just imagine in our minds a timeline that begins with sexuality. And then sexuality, if you leave it alone, naturally can result in conception. And then conception, if you leave it alone, naturally results in birth. And then birth, if you leave it alone, naturally results in human growth, toddlerhood, elementary school, high school, then college, and then on into adulthood. And then if you leave the natural life cycle alone, then aging takes place. And then aging eventually results in death. And that's kind of the way the natural life cycle works, right? And so then I probably gave you the idea of, okay, so how can we interfere with sexuality causing conception? Well, we can use contraception. Well, the Roman Catholic Church says contraception is wrong because it interferes with the natural life cycle, right?
Yes.
Did I talk to y'all about that? True?
Yes, you did.
Okay, and then I applied that to the issue of abortion, and that's why the Catholic Church is anti-abortion. Then I applied that to the issue of capital punishment. I applied that to the issue of physician-assisted suicide. I don't know if I applied it to the issue of homosexuality, but that's why the Catholic Church is anti-homosexuality. Does not condone it as a lifestyle because it's a violation of the natural life cycle. It doesn't lead to procreation, etc. So that's kind of the way it works. That's why it's called natural law ethics. That's the way the universe or nature is set up by the creator. For Aristotle, it was the prime mover. For Aquinas, it was the Christian God, the creator. And that's kind of the way natural law ethics works. So weaknesses, I talked about a couple of weaknesses probably of natural law ethics. One weakness that stands out is the idea that natural law ethics is very hard to apply in our modern day technological context. It was much easier in Aquinas's day. It's much harder to apply today with issues like IVF and vitro fertilization and so many other technological issues that are emerging. Another critique of natural law ethics is that it's overly simplistic. But a strength of natural law ethics is that it's amazingly consistent. It's just straight down the line, amazingly consistent. So that's natural law ethics. Do you have questions about natural law ethics? Do I
So,
need to fill in some blanks there?
not for the actual concept itself, but specifically linking that to the naturalistic method using Moore's like naturalistic fallacy.
Yeah.
It's basically where they're saying, oh, you can define morality through why am I blanking on the word?
Scientific
Epistemology.
yeah. Really, natural law ethics is a bit more nuanced than that. Natural law ethics says that in nature, there are just these laws, moral laws that are present in nature that are just like the physical laws that are present in nature, such as gravity. All right. It's not
Okay.
saying that it's scientifically verifiable. Moore was addressing something else. But it is saying that just as there are physical laws in the universe that the creator has set up, like the law of gravity, if you violate the law of gravity, you're going to pay the price, right? If you jump out of a tall building, if you jump out of an airplane and your parachute doesn't come out, or if you jump off of your house, if you violate the law of gravity, you're going to pay the price, the consequence for that. Natural law ethics says that if you violate these eternal ethical laws that the creator has installed in the universe, you're also going to pay a price for that. Life is not going to be productive. Your society is not going to be as strong. Life is going to be less meaningful. It's going to be cheapened, etc. Now, does that make sense?
Yes, I was just asking for clarity where
Yeah.
one form of natural is more science-based when it's
Yeah.
referring to it, while the other
Yeah.
is more creator and
Yeah,
religious-based.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. G.E. Moore was addressing another dimension of the issue. Okay. Any other questions about natural law ethics?
No.
All right. Then we talked about utilitarianism, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We talked about utilitarianism, and I define utilitarianism as creating the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so we looked at two individuals. One of those was Jeremy Bentham, and the other of those was John Stuart Mill. Let's talk about Jeremy Bentham first. I did on my slide presentation with you guys, I did show the video, the photo of Jeremy Bentham, did I not?
Yeah, that creepy taxidermy.
Yeah. All right. So Jeremy Bentham is kind of the popularizer and the father of utilitarianism. He is a quantitative utilitarian. He is a quantitative utilitarian, not a qualitative utilitarian. So, as a quantitative utilitarian, he is concerned purely with the quantity of good that is produced. All right. And for example, I have one apple, and I have two students in the class that are interested in having an apple to eat because they love apples. And I have one apple, I don't have two apples. And so I'm confronted with a moral dilemma of what am I going to do with my one apple, since I have two students that are hungry for an apple. Mr. Mill says, just do that, which will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of students. Split the apple in half and give a half to each of the students. Don't distinguish between them, treat them equally, etc. Right? So that's quantitative utilitarianism. Then there is John Stuart Mill, who is a qualitative utilitarian who came after Bentham. He emphasized the quality of the good that is produced. The quality of the good that is produced. So I have those two students that come to me and they're hungry for an apple. I have one apple. He says, you look at considerations such as who has been hungriest the longest, who's going to appreciate the apple the most, who is going to enjoy the apple for the longest or the greatest length of time. So he really goes into the weeds with regard to attempting to assess the quality, who will be more appreciative of the apple, the portion of the apple that I give them. And so that's the way Mr. Mill says we make those kinds of decisions. So he is a qualitative utilitarian, and his is much more complicated than Mr. Bentham. Another thing that I always try to point out about utilitarianism is that utilitarianism is interesting in this sense, that you really can't know if an action was ethical or unethical until you see the outcome or the results or the consequences.
So how would you navigate that in, I guess, your application of utilitarianism to where,
Okay.
I mean, you can sit there and play out all the possibilities in your head and go with your best bet, but in the example you used, if you're helping an old man across the street, how are you to know that you're going to trip and push him into a car?
You don't.
Well, then how can that be useful?
It's only useful in review.
I
And
I
that's
guess
a
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a problem with utilitarianism. The action is not right or wrong in and of itself. It's only, you can only assess it in review. And that's what governments and policy gurus do all the time. They'll say, well, that was a good policy because we look back and my God, look at how many people we helped through Medicaid, or look at how many people we helped through this food stamp program, or they'll look back and say, oh my God, look at all that we handed out the money and nobody wants to go back to work. So maybe that wasn't a good decision at the time, right? So that's a problem with utilitarianism. You can only assess the moral dimensions of the action that was taken in review. At the moment you're making it, you really can't know if it's the moral thing. You can anticipate and ponder and conjecture, I guess, that, okay, if I do this, then this will probably be the outcome, or this is the intended outcome. But you really can't know until the old man's laying dead in the street. You know?
Well, it's like if you give a homeless person money, your hope is that they'll go buy food, but what if they turn around and buy drugs?
That's right. Well, when I was teaching at the law school, this is very interesting that you bring this up. When I was teaching at the law school, one of the professors that I was teaching with, she had come across a homeless person living in one of the parks over by her house where she runs, and he was living in a tent, and she bought him some kind of television and some kind of little, I guess, rabbit ear so that he could have a television in his little tent. And she did that, and the next time she went by and stopped to see him, he had sold the television for drugs. So your point is well made. Was her decision a good decision? Well, at the time, her intention was that it'd be a good decision, but in hindsight, it wasn't a good decision. Right?
Well, and my friends and I have gotten into this conversation many times, and at the end of the day, we just kind of chalk it up to, well, you did your part, and you're kind of just hands off at that point. With they do what they want after that,
That's right. And then you start getting into, you start bleeding over into ethical egoism, right? Did we talk about egoism in this class? I don't think so.
I'm not sure. Again, I was trying to fit all the videos in.
I don't think we talked about ethical egoism. I skipped that theory. Ethical egoism says, well, the right thing to do is the thing that makes you feel better.
Well, and that's another argument of ethics. Like, are you really doing it for the right reasons or just to make yourself feel good?
You see, you can't win. You can't win this category. We're doomed all the way around. We're condemned to existential despair. We can never really know. We're just doing the best we can, aren't we? It's crazy.
It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. You're always going to be haunted by the path not taken, or by the path taken, maybe. All right. So, anything else that I need to clarify about utilitarianism?
No, I think that one was very well played out, and you were pretty thorough.
All right. Did we talk about moral relativism?
Yes, we did.
All right. Moral relativism. Now, this is a hot theory. That we are living in a day and time when we are inundated with moral relativism. Moral relativism is an anti-ethics theory. All right. Moral relativism says there is no moral absolute, that the right thing is whatever you think the right thing is for you. It's all relative, right? this is summed up in the popular statement, that we all engage in, sometimes just out of conflict avoidance. Well, that's right for me, but it's not necessarily right for you, or that's right for you, but it's not necessarily right for me. Moral relativism says it's the rightness or the wrongness of a moral action, or rightness or wrongness of more. That, or let me say it this way: that morality is rooted in the individual, not in some external absolute standard. That right and wrong varies from individual to individual, or varies from culture to culture. Moral relativism. Everything is relative to the individual. So for me, I might say, well, okay, so abortion is right for me, and you say, well, abortion is wrong for me, and we both say, okay. There's no one standard. It's just dependent upon the individual and their comfort level and their own standards, their own morality. Or we might say, I think capital punishment is right, and you might say capital punishment is wrong. And we would just simply say, okay, we're going to agree to disagree. There's no concern with what is absolutely right. It's the fact that right and wrong varies from individual to individual. We might say on a social level or a cultural level, some cultures practice polygamy, some cultures do not practice polygamy. And so therefore, that's just the way it is. So it's right in some cultures, it's wrong in other cultures. So in and of itself, there's no moral rightness or wrongness about it. It's contingent upon the culture. That's relative, relativism. It's kind of summed up in the statement of when in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's relativism. And our generation today is bombarded with relativism all the time. Now, a problem with relativism is that moral relativism is self-refuting. It's self-refuting. So what do I mean by self-refuting? I mean this. On the one hand, moral relativism says there is no absolute standard to determine right and wrong. All right. When the moral relativist says that, they are presenting an absolute standard or an absolute Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Um, so the last thing I think I said was that moral relativism is self-refuting in that it says there is no absolute truth. Well, that's an absolute statement. That's a statement of absolute truth or alleged to be absolute truth. So it's self-refuting. It says on the one hand, there are no absolute truths, but it holds that statement out as an absolute truth. So if what they're saying is true, then we can't depend upon their absolute truth that they just presented. In that sense, it's self-refuting. So that's kind of an overview of moral and ethical relativism. Is there anything that stands out regarding moral and ethical relativism that that I need to address?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward.
All right. All right. So then we moved on to Nietzsche and the will to power. True.
Yes, but after that video, that's where I stopped. So I stopped at the slave versus master morality.
Okay. Okay, that's good. All right. So Nietzsche and the will to power. Nietzsche is pretty controversial, but brilliant, but controversial. So we talked about Nietzsche's theory as an anti-ethics theory, that he rejects traditional approaches to morality. We talked about his idea of the Übermensch, right? And his ethical principle known as the will to power. Just to summarize, Nietzsche says that the great civilizations of the world, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Romans, the Greeks, they were all oriented towards self-assertion and power. They did not waste their time trying to rescue the weak or the victimized or the downtrodden or the left behind. They left them to essentially naturally die away. And so Nietzsche's theory is kind of a social evolution, whereas Darwin presented biological evolution and the survival of the fittest. Nietzsche takes that concept and applies it on a social scale and a national scale, and says that great nations of the world should not concern themselves with the weaker. They should allow the weaker and the victimized to simply pass by the wayside. So he was into self-assertion, power, self-interest, self-aggrandizement, all of those kinds of things, because that's what makes a person great, and that's what makes a nation or a kingdom great. He sees social class as consisting of really two categories of people: the Übermensch. The Übermensch, the word means overman, which we might translate in a contemporary fashion as the Superman, the Supermen. He cites individuals like Plato, Socrates, Jesus, Goethe, the German poet. These are people who have, John Locke, the British philosopher. These are people who have risen out of the herd to a level of greatness. They are the intellectuals, the powerful. Today, we would cite people like Jeff Bezos, maybe in technology, or Elon Musk in technology, or in computer technology, Bill Gates, or Steve Jobs, or people of that nature. Oprah in entertainment, Oprah Winfrey in entertainment. These are people that have risen to the point that they are shapers of horizon, shaper of the moral horizons of the culture. And so, so there are those groups. That's the Superman, and then there's the herd. The herd are the average people that will never rise to greatness, that don't want to rise to greatness, that are not the intelligentsia, that are not trying to improve themselves really. When I think of the herd, I think of people, like my own family growing up, they went to work and they were hard workers and they punched into to work and did their jobs and drove home and watched TV that night and got up and did it all again the next day. But they weren't concerned with with greatness or self-assertion or anything to that effect. So those are the two social classes. The herd, the Ubermensch, exerts influence over the herd by establishing moral horizons. And then the herd tries to find a way whereby they can control the Ubermensch and get them off of their backs. How did they do that? Can you tell me?
Through Christianity?
Yes, through Christianity, through the Christian ethic. Along comes Jesus and Christianity, and Christianity says, well, no, self-assertion is wrong, self-aggrandizement is wrong, power is wrong, you need to be kind, you need to be merciful, you need to be caring. And so the herd tells the Ubermensch, that's the way you need to treat us, in a caring way, a kind way, a merciful way. And so suddenly the Ubermensches are having to care for the victimized. And Nietzsche says no nation has ever risen, or person has ever risen to greatness by doing that. We should not commit ourselves to a social welfare state, in short, of caring for the weak, caring for the mentally limited, the physically handicapped, the economically limited, the aged, the poor. Doing those kinds of things will zap the leader's time in the nation, and the nation will not go forward. So that's kind of the way that plays itself out. Is there anything that I need to say specifically beyond those things to clarify something about Nietzsche and the will to power?
I think his kind of redeeming sense is when he made that revelation of, it doesn't matter, there's no God. So at that point, shape your own life and make your own morals. But then it kind of started to downturn towards like inspiring Hitler and stuff.
Yes, yeah, Nietzsche was the one who pronounced God is dead. And by that, he was saying we no longer have a need for a concept of God as a coping mechanism in life. And so he's saying, make the most of who you are, assert who you are. Because he said many Christians find in God a coping mechanism that excuses them from being responsible for the caring for their own life and their own future. Now, I think that's a valid criticism of those of us, and I consider myself a Christian, but I see that too often in the Christian context. God just becomes a coping mechanism by which I excuse myself from being responsible for setting goals and objectives and ambitions and those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think the positive of Nietzsche is he calls us to seize the moment with our lives. He does. He says, make the most of. Don't be a member of the herd. Don't be average. Don't be mediocre. Rise above the herd. And too many people today are satisfied with being a part of the herd. Looking like the herd, acting like the herd, talking like the herd, rise above, self-actualize, in the words of Maslow in his hierarchy of needs, self-actualize. But anyhow, the downside of Nietzsche is, his philosophy did lead to a philosophy of racial superiority and supremacy and the rise of Nazism and those things. So that's the downside of Nietzsche. It got out of hand in that respect, and so the Jews were slaughtered, and then the gypsies were slaughtered, and the mentally handicapped were slaughtered in Germany, and the physically handicapped. But so we try to look for takeaway in a positive sense, but also negatives among these movements. And I'm in no way condoning the totality of what Nietzsche advocated, but I think there's some stuff we can take away from it. Anything else we need to clarify about Nietzsche?
No, I think especially looking at like his when he was alive in the 1900s. Like that's actually pretty, or the 19th century, he was pretty profound in his way of thinking. Because then you look at our society today, and media has really just strengthened that herd mentality.
Yeah, he's one of my classes at Prairie View made the comment this week that it's well, no, it wasn't Prairie View. Yeah, maybe it wasn't Prairie View. That Nietzsche was almost functioning as a prophet. He was seeing the future almost. That we're living in a day and time when people need to be told, okay, seize the moment, rise above, don't be satisfied with mediocrity, because that's a problem. That's why I admire you guys for going to school and going to college. It's not the most convenient thing to do, and we're living in a day and time when it's downplayed, but it's a means whereby you engage in positive self-assertion and self-improvement and responsible living and those kinds of things and thinking. So anyhow, all right. So if there's nothing else about Nietzsche, let's talk about the ethics of care and deep ecology ethics. All right, the ethics of care, all I'm going to say about that is the ethics of care is essentially feminist ethics. Feminist ethics endorses an ethic, what it calls an ethic of care. Feminist ethics is another anti-ethical theory that endorses an ethic that rejects traditional approaches to ethics, because feminist ethics says that the traditional approaches to ethics are male dominated and typically white male dominated. That's a valid critique. I will say that. That's a valid critique. When most of the great ethical theories that we've been looking at, the proponents of those theories have been white males. So feminist ethics says white males are into hierarchy and structure and rules and maxims and principles. So they reject that. And the feminists say ethics should focus upon the caring thing to do. We should engage in the caring thing, the nurturing thing to do, and reject this stuff of hierarchy and principles and maxims and rules and those things. So that's what is meant by a feminist ethic of care. Feminist ethics looks at the corporate world in which my wife works and says that the corporate world is a world that, my God, look at their corporate charts. They're all hierarchy. They're all structure. There's various levels of authority throughout the thing. And feminist ethics hate that. That they say that's the problem with the corporate world. It's male, white, hierarchically dominated. We need to do the more nurturing thing. We need to be more humane and interactive in our dealings with people in the context of the corporation, as well as the customers of the corporation. So anyhow, that's kind of the ethics of care, the feminist ethics of care. Deep ecology ethics is environmental ethics. Deep ecology ethics is environmental ethics. Deep ecology ethics essentially says that we human beings are only one aspect of the ecosphere. In the past, we viewed creation in terms of, and the environment in terms of hierarchy. Humanity at the top and various levels of life below humanity. Animal life down to the lowest form of animal life, to plant life down to the lowest form of plant life hierarchy. Deep ecology ethics rejects, once again, that hierarchy and says that we are all a part of one giant ecosphere that has smaller ecospheres in it, that each level of life is valuable, and that we have to realize that the way that the decisions that I make as a human being affects every other aspect of life in the ecosphere. This is deep ecology ethics. This is what environmental ethics is rooted in. Ecological ethics is rooted in. Marine or maritime ethics is rooted in. Environmentalism, those kind of. that we're all of life in the ecosphere and the sub-ecospheres are equal. Even getting down to now, I can't remember if I said this in y'all's lecture or not, but one of the, if all life is equal, what do we do with bacterial life? Is bacterial life equal to human life, or even my dog's non-human animal life? The bacteria that is excreted from the human or from other animals, non-human animals, there's bacterial life in those excretions. So once again, those theories reach a point of absurdity. It's I mean, I don't, it's how far do we go with this? Is a goldfish's life equal to a baby's life? I mean, how far do we go with this? So that's just the world that we live in, and these are the battles we're fighting. But deep ecology ethics is environmental ethics. It's also social justice ethics. So that's deep ecology ethics and ethics of care. Any questions about those things at all? I know that Ms. Chadwick, I know that you haven't listened to those videos. Any questions about those things yet?
No, not yet, but I'm listening to
All right.
those later tonight.
All right, so I think that essentially covers the ethical theories that we've looked at. I know I'm being long-winded here, but I think that, is there anything else regarding ethics that I haven't talked about that I need to talk about? All right, if there's not, then let's touch on philosophy of religion, right? Good? Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you miserable?
Define miserable.
Oh my God, you're becoming a philosopher. One second, I've got to let my dog out of my study. All right, so religion. We talked about the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument, the gambler's argument. Did we talk about the volitional arguments?
I'm looking now. I'm not sure about volitional.
I don't think we talked about those. I don't usually talk about those. Did we talk about Marx, Feuerbach, and Freud?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And then evil and suffering, did we talk about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's just start with the ontological argument. The ontological argument is the most philosophical of all of the arguments. It's the argument from being. And it's an argument by definition. It's an a priori argument, which means it's an argument based upon definition. It's a self-defining statement, and it deals with the being or the existence of God, and says God, by definition, must exist. So it says that God is the greatest possible being, that as the greatest possible being, he must exist not only in our mind as a concept, but he must exist in reality. Therefore, God, by definition, as the greatest possible being, is required to exist. Essentially, because if he doesn't exist, he's not the greatest possible being. But by definition, he is the greatest possible being. So therefore, he must be required to exist. So that's kind of the flow of the ontological argument. Does that argument make sense?
It makes sense, but I know that we also said the main objection was that the argument's invalid.
Yes. So we'll talk about some of the weaknesses of the ontological argument. One of the weaknesses of the ontological argument is Gonio's argument. Did I talk to you about that? The island, the perfect island?
Yes.
All right. So Gonio's critique that you should look at says, just because I can posit the perfect island in my mind does not require that the perfect island exists in reality. So that basically is a pointing out a weakness in the ontological argument, in that it's simply a logically inconsistent argument. So that's one. Now the counter to Gonio's argument is this. Well, there's an infinite qualitative difference between the perfect island and God. God is in a different category than a perfect island. Certainly that's true of an island. Because it exists in my mind doesn't mean that it exists in reality. But God is in a different category. He's not like an island. He's a unique category. He's the greatest possible being. So that's kind of the way the argument falls out with regard to Gonio. Then did we talk about Mr. Kant's critique of the ontological argument?
Yes, he talked about existence isn't a predicate.
Yes, Mr. Kant says the flaw with the ontological argument is that existence is not a predicate. So then the question is, what the hell does he mean when he says existence is not a predicate? Well, I hope I use the illustration of, if you were to use predicates to describe Dr. Carter, you would say he's bald, he's white. If you saw me, I'm 6 feet tall. I am a little stooped because I tend to spend too much time at the desk. You might say I have somewhat of a sense of humor. You might say other things about me, but you would never say, well, another attribute of his is existence. You would never say he's tall, he's white, he has glasses, he exists. You would never say that, I don't think. That's what Kant's point is, that you would never say existence is an attribute or a predicate. And yet the ontological argument reduces existence to an attribute or a predicate. And Mr. Kant says that's just linguistically invalid. You can't do that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think there's questions on the exam about both of those two critiques. Just to give you insight, I think there's questions on there about both of those two. All right, so that's the ontological argument. I love the ontological argument, but every one of these damned arguments have their weaknesses. They have their flaws. They just do. None of them are perfect. They're all based upon some degree of rationality and reason. They all have flaws. They're not religious arguments. They are rational arguments. All right, so the ontological argument is the argument from being. The cosmological argument, you should remember, is the argument from causation. All right. The cosmological argument was, I should say, the ontological argument was advocated by Anselm. The cosmological argument is advocated by Aquinas, based upon Aristotle. Aquinas loved Aristotle. So the cosmological argument is the argument based upon causation. All right, it goes, like, I'm trying to remember if I can remember the premises of the argument as I gave them to you. The first one.
I have it in front of me. Do you want me to just read it?
Yeah, give me the first one.
The universe exists.
The universe exists. All right. Premise one. Premise two.
Everything that exists has a cause.
Everything exists has a cause. And then number three, conclusion.
Causes precede effects.
Causes precede effects. Okay, good.
The chain of cause and effect cannot go back in time indefinitely or infinitely regress.
Yes, good.
Therefore, there must be a first cause.
There you go. And that causes time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So that's an a posteriori argument. Ontological argument is an a priori argument. That's an a posteriori argument because it's based upon our experience. There's nothing in this room, my study that I'm sitting in, that doesn't have a cause. There's nothing in this room that just popped into existence. Everything in this room has a cause. Something caused it. So at the risk of oversimplification, the cosmological argument says, if you look around at the external world outside of my window, I see trees, grass. That stuff didn't just pop into existence. It has to have a cause. And so it says this chain of causation that caused all this stuff cannot go back in infinite regression. Do you know what that means?
Constantly is just going back forever.
Yeah, it can't go back forever. So therefore, there has to be a starting point, and that starting point is a first cause, and that first cause is God. So therefore, God must exist to set all of this in motion. So there are a number of that's kind of the way the argument works. Let's think about some critiques of the argument. Critiques of the argument. All right. Ms. Chadwick, do you have critiques there in front of you? I can remember Hume, but
I do. So the first one is, it is conceivable that cause and effect extends back into infinity.
all right, yeah. Why is that so? Well, because we can think of infinite progression. Why can we not think of infinite regression? Infinite progression can occur in mathematics, for example. All you do in mathematics is add one, and numbers go on forever. So why can infinite regression also? Why can't that go on forever into the past? Right. That's one. Next.
Based on the assumption that everything has a cause.
It's based on the assumption that everything has a cause. I'm not sure what I was getting at there.
Well, back when we were talking about causation, I think there were, I can't remember who it was, but one of the philosophers was saying, not things don't have a cause, and you can see, like, for example, you can see the pool cue hitting a pool ball, but there's no way to actually know about a cause. I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Causation is more in the mind. Yeah. Okay.
The next one is, if one accepts the idea of a first cause, which means that something has always existed, why can't you then assume that the universe has always existed?
Yeah. Okay. So that critique is saying this. Isn't it just as easy if you're going to say, well, there's a God that created it all, who's always existed? Isn't it just easier to say, well, why can't we posit the idea that the universe has always existed? I mean, if we can posit the idea of a God always existing that we've never seen, that we don't know is around for sure, isn't it easier just to posit the idea or the possibility that the universe has always existed, that it's eternal? Why do we need a God? All right, so that's a critique. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then it also goes into the Kalam and modal cosmological argument. Do you want me to touch on those?
No, those are not on the exam. Don't worry about that.
Yay.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about that. Now then, there was something else I wanted to say about that cosmological argument. But I can't remember what it was.
Was it about Pascal?
No.
Unfortunately, those are all the notes I have from that video.
Right, that's all right. Let me see what I can pull up here. Let me do this. Okay. One second. Okay. I don't see what I wanted to bring up. That's all right. Maybe it's not that important. Is there anything else I need to say about the cosmological argument?
Not that I can think of.
All right, if there is, then y'all email me, but the cosmological, there's something about Hume that I wanted to bring up, but I can't recall what it was. All right, so the cosmological argument is based upon cause and effect. The teleological argument is based upon design and purpose. It essentially says that there's design and purpose in the cosmos. This design and purpose did not come about randomly or arbitrarily. There must be a design giver or a purpose giver. So therefore, there must be a God who's instilled in the cosmos design or purpose. By design or purpose, the seasons come and go with regularity. The earth doesn't burn up because it's so close to the sun. We don't freeze to death because we're so far from the sun. Everything occurs with an amazing regularity. You can depend upon gravity, et cetera, et cetera. So there's design and purpose in the universe. So that's the argument based upon design or purpose, the teleological argument. And then we talked about Paley's watchmaker analogy. True.
Yes, I like that analogy.
Yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic. And so you get the gist of that argument that a watch would not have just flown together so as to keep time perfectly or generally perfectly. So if there's a watchmaker, then there must be a divine cosmos maker because of the purpose and design in the cosmos. The weaknesses with the teleological argument, well, from number one, just as there is purpose in the universe, there's also chaos in the universe. What do we do with that? There's natural evil, there's moral evil. There's natural evil, hurricanes, typhoons, tornadoes, etc. There's moral evil, human on human violence. So if we're going to give God credit for teleology, order, then do we have to give God also blame for dysteleology or disorder? So that's one critique. Another critique is that there are other explanations for the order of the universe now via the Enlightenment in the 1800s from Darwin and evolution. So that's another critique. And is there another critique that I haven't mentioned?
Yes, the conclusion doesn't tell us anything about God. Like, is he still around, or is there more than one?
Yeah, and this that doesn't tell us anything about this. And this is what I wanted to say about the cosmological argument as well. That just because we conclude that there is a God based upon this argument and the cosmological argument doesn't tell us anything about his nature. We don't know what he's like. It's not necessarily the Christian God. We don't know if it's one God. We don't know if it's two gods. We don't know if it's a committee of gods. We don't know if he started it and he's no longer around. So we don't know if he's eternal. So it's, even it just doesn't tell us anything about the God, except that he's he started it. That if he exists, he started it. But beyond that, he had enough power to start it. It doesn't even tell us that he has maximal power. It only says that he has enough power to start it. It's not. It doesn't require that he have all power, be omnipotent, all powerful. All he has to have is enough power to start it. So it doesn't really tell us anything about his nature. All right. So that's the teleological argument. Any other questions about the teleological argument?
Is the fine-tuning argument going to be on the exam?
No, there's no question about the fine-tuning argument. No.
Okay, that was my only question.
If there is one that pops up, I'm thinking about the question bank. It'll only be something like who's the originator of the fine-tuning argument, and I put Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, but I don't like that. But if that pops up, that's the answer. I'll tell you that. All right. So then the moral argument. Did we talk about the moral argument?
Yes, we did.
All right. The advocate for the moral argument is Immanuel Kant. And at the risk of oversimplification, Immanuel Kant says this about the moral argument, that we have a sense of moral ought in our lives. Every human being has a sense of moral ought, and none of us have lived up completely to that sense of moral ought in our lives. And we won't in this life, Kant says. But Kant also says that ought implies can. Why would we have this sense of ought if we can never live up to it? So Kant says that requires, since we cannot live up to it in this life, that requires that there must be a next life in which we can be perfect and live up to this sense of ought. And so in order for there to be a next life, Kant says there must be a God who creates the next life and puts that sense of ought in us. That's essentially the moral argument. It's an interesting argument. I don't like it necessarily, but it's an interesting argument. And it stems from the idea of ought implies can. For example, I would never hold my son responsible for something that he ought to do if he actually cannot do it. So I would never punish him for not being able to build a rocket at age 10 if he doesn't have the capacity to build a rocket at age 10. So this fact that we have this sense of ought requires that we be able to fulfill this sense of ought in some context for us to be held accountable for what we've done with this sense of ought, according to Kant. Now, does that make sense?
It does. I found it interesting primarily because we just talked about ethics after this, that Immanuel Kant kind of alludes to this moral duty, but it's like, how do we know God's implication of moral? Like, how do we know what's right or wrong or what we should be trying to achieve?
Yeah, and I think you're onto something. And I think Kant, I think it's indisputable that we have this sense of moral duty. Every person has this sense of moral duty. But I think Kant makes a leap when he attributes that to God. I mean, religiously, I think we do that all the time, and you can get away with that in a religious context. But in a philosophical context, I don't think you can rationally make the leap that says this sense of oughtness comes from God. That's a leap to me. This sense of oughtness may just come from cultural conditioning, from my parents, from my school teachers, from my college professor, or from my friends, or having been put in the church, raised up in the church, or from television. I mean, it could just be conditioning, this sense of oughtness. Who says that it must come from God? So it's interesting. All right, that's the moral argument. All right, any other questions about the moral argument? All right, the gambler's argument. The gambler's argument is Mr. Pascal. It's pretty basic. It says that that belief in God is basically a wager. If you believe that God, if you do not believe that God exists and you die, only to find that he does exist, Pascal says you've lost your soul. But if you do believe that God exists and you die, only to find that he doesn't exist, Pascal says you haven't lost anything. So the conclusion of his argument is that it's safer to hedge your bets that he does exist and run the risk that he does not, because then you still will have lived a good life. Otherwise, you lose it all. I said that's really not a rational argument. That's an argument based upon chance. But you don't hear this argument so much in religious circles and from people today as you used to. But you used to hear this argument a lot. Well, you better believe in God just to cover your butt. You don't hear that much today. Even in churches, you don't hear it. But I used to hear this all the time. You better believe in God just to cover yourself, just in case there's some kind of cosmic being at home in the universe, because you don't want to take that risk. So anyhow, that's the gambler's argument. Any questions about the gambler's argument?
No.
All right, then Marx, Feuerbach, and Freud, we cited those as individuals who try to explain the erroneous belief in God's existence. Freud says that God is nothing more than a projection of a divine father figure. Feuerbach says, my gosh, what is it that Feuerbach says? Can you refresh my memory, Ms. Chadwick?
So in my notes, and this kind of threw me off for the forum question, you mentioned Freud, Marx, and Kant. And I was wondering if that's a typo.
That's a typo. It should have been Freud, Marx, and Feuerbach.
Okay, so in that case, so for that one, for Kant, quote unquote, it said morality requires the coincidence of virtue and happiness, which can be done by God.
Oh, just eliminate that. That's just total. I don't know what I did on that.
Okay, that really got me on the forum question. I was like, oh.
I must have been drunk when I wrote that. No,
It's the same pleasure, right?
I don't get drunk, but no, just discard that. It should have been Feuerbach, Freud, and Marx. Marx says that. Let me see. Marx says, for some reason, I'm having a neurological lapse with regard to Feuerbach.
So I know Marx talked about how religion is kind of like our opium to compensate for the socio-political alienation.
Yes. Feuerbach says the traits of God, I looked it up in my notes, traits of God are simply projections of human characteristics. Feuerbach says the traits of God are simply projections of human characteristics. Like humans have power, humans have knowledge, humans have kindness. So we project those into the notion of an idea of a God that has all power, has all knowledge, and is all good. So those attributes of human beings are something that we project onto this non-existent divine being. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Karl Marx says that we believe in God in order to cope with social alienation and loneliness in the human condition. We want to believe that there's someone at home in the universe who cares for us. We feel lonely, isolated, estranged, cut off, all right? And then Freud says religious feelings are essentially nothing more than infantile feelings of helplessness. And we create a divine father figure to watch over us, a cosmic father figure to watch over us. So really, all three of those guys are saying that our belief in God is nothing more than a coping mechanism. He doesn't really exist. We've just created God in our own minds in order to cope with life. All right. So that's really the essence of what you need to know about those three: Marx, Feuerbach, and Freud. I hate that I mentioned Kant. That was totally a neurological lapse on my part. All right, and then finally we talked about evil and suffering.
Yes, we did.
Evil and suffering. The greatest argument, I think, against the existence of God is the issue of why is there evil and suffering in the world if there is a God who exists. Traditional theism says that God is all powerful, all knowing, and all powerful, all knowing, and all good. All right, so if there's a child in Children's Hospital right now who has childhood leukemia, there's a problem, because here's what we have. We have a God who is all knowing. He knows how to heal the child. We have a God who is all powerful. He's powerful enough to heal the child. And then we have a God who is all good. So he wants good things for the child. So just from the rational perspective, we have a logical inconsistency. The only way that traditional theism can get around that logically is to compromise one of those attributes, to say either he is not all good, or to say that either he is not all knowing, he doesn't know what to do about it, or to say that he's not all powerful, he can't fix it, or to say that he's not all present, it's not happening in his presence. So that's the nature of the dilemma with regard to God's existence and evil and suffering in the world. And so for the traditional theist, that's a real obstacle. Now, theists have come up with a variety of arguments. Sometimes I go into those in my class and sometimes I don't, depending upon time. Did I go into those arguments with y'all? The goodwill argument, the mystery argument. I did.
There was a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. The goodwill argument, the mystery argument.
Yeah, the artistic, the saintless.
The artistic, yeah, the saintliness, the artistic. The first thing I would say about those is my preference on those, and I'm a theist and I'm a Christian, is the mystery argument. I just think there are times when we just have to say we don't understand and we don't know. I can't explain it. I think that's a matter of integrity, saying that, just admitting it. I don't know. When someone asks me, why does a child have cancer, or what did this car wreck happen that killed my child or my loved one? I don't know. I don't know. There's just no simple explanation to it. And it trivializes the question to try and give them an answer to it. It's just a complicated dilemma. The second thing I would say about that is, I don't think for the purposes of the exam, you need to know each of those arguments. I would have them in front of me because y'all can use your notes on the exam. I've told y'all that, I hope. I'd have a sheet of paper that had those in front of me that I could reference, but I don't think there is based on my looking at the exam, I don't think there are specifics on y'all's exam regarding that. But have it on a sheet of paper in front of you just in case, because I don't want to lead you astray there. But I certainly don't memorize those things. Just have it on a sheet of paper, and if one comes up, then reference it. All right. Was that helpful?
Yes. I like the disciplinary approach.
Okay.
I kind of like the idea that suffering teaches us patience and endurance, and you can find knowledge in hardship.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily speak to like hardships through the innocent, but I mean, like that child's parents are having to deal with a lot of coping and patience and anger and emotions at the world. So they're hopefully learning through that. Not that the child deserves leukemia.
That's right. That's right. It's you can say that is one of what we might, and I wouldn't say this to a family member going through it, but you can say in your mind, that's one of the positive outcomes on the human character. It does teach us resilience and discipline, and instills within us some qualities that otherwise we might not have.
Yeah, I think that's just the optimism in me. I don't think I would tell the parents that.
Yeah. But it's interesting to think about. These things. But that's the big dilemma for the theist. All right. Now, listen. If y'all have any questions regarding something that you come up with, whether if you're watching this on video or if you're in the review right now, shoot me an email and I'll be glad to answer it. I'll check my email tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, and the exam I think is open Monday through the 17th. Is that right?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Let me check my notes.
Right. So shoot me an email and ask me a question, and I'll try to give you any direction or help that I can.
So, Professor?
Right. Yes, sir.
Oh, the exam's gonna be multiple choice, right?
It's all multiple choice. It's multiple choice, four options for each question, A, B, C, D. That's it. Do you like that?
Yes, that's a nice reprieve from the true false.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any true false stuff on there. I think it's all multiple choice. Yeah. I mean, even if it's true false, it's A true, B false, but I don't think I have any of those on this exam, on y'all's exam. I think it's all A, B, C, D. All right. Okay. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you guys in my class. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if I can be of assistance to you in your futures. And I am glad to help. Just keep my email handy and don't hesitate to call upon me, okay?
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a great rest of the weekend, and let me know if you have further questions.
All right. Thank
Sounds
you.
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.